Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the AFS Cinema and Jewels in the Wasteland. And we just had a very special mixer in the lobby, a member mixer. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank all of the AFS members for supporting everything that we do and for being part of all the good work we're doing at AFS. So let's give yourselves a big round of applause. Thank you, members. And if you're not a member, you just saw our great trailer, definitely join all the great perks. You don't have to be a member to see movies at the AFS Cinema, but it helps support all of the great work we do with filmmakers and students and all the repertory programs we show here at the theater, so we encourage you to join. I'd also like to thank Freestyle Language Center for being part of our screening tonight. Merci beaucoup. I know that you're going to be speaking French afterwards in the lobby, so a reminder to all of those taking part of the conversation, you're going to go to the lobby after our conversation and discuss L'ami de mon ami en français. So tonight we have Jewels in the Wasteland, which is our long-running series programmed by our artistic director, Richard Linklater. These are all films that we show in 35 millimeter. Who loves to watch movies on 35 millimeter? Everybody. And sometimes when you show movies on 35 millimeter, sometimes you get a little bit of scratches and a little dirt. These prints have been kind of through it. This is an original show print. Most of the film prints that we get in this series are new and beautiful, but this one's a little older, so just bear with it and enjoy that analog experience of watching real celluloid. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our programmer and artistic director, Richard Linklater, here for Boyfriends and Girlfriends.
Thanks, Holly. Thank all you guys. It's so exciting to have a big crowd to see an Eric Romer film on a Wednesday night in Austin, Texas. I love it. I look forward to this film. It's kind of like, I was thinking on the way over here, I'm experiencing this film within this series the way I experienced Romer films in the 80s. They're kind of these beautiful, summer breezy palate cleansers to all the nastiness in the in the 80s. They're very different. If you think of the characters in this movie, they're the kind of characters that John Carpenter, a few weeks ago, would have loved to have killed. Michael Lee would have made incredible fun of these kind of young, Parisian, shallow, yuppie kind of people. But Romer is a master. He will charm you and pull you in the most subtle, profound ways. He is, I think, for me, top 5, top 10 filmmakers who ever lived. He's a French New Wave guy, but he's very different. He's older. You know, all those guys were born like 30-ish. He was born in 1920. Didn't really make his first films. He was an editor at Cahiers du Cinema. He was more of a writer. He started making some shorts, but he didn't have his breakthroughs till the end of the 60s. My Night at Maud's, or The Collector was like 67. My Night at Maud's was like 69. You know, he divides his career into these sections. He would do these sections of films. He's kind of like a novelist. He approached films like novels. So the first section was moral tales, and it was like My Night at Maud's, Claire's Knee, Perfect. Yeah, Chloe in the Afternoon, Love in the Afternoon. That section, and then this is my favorite section, the middle section, the 80s. He had this great 80s, and he called the films comedies and proverbs. And you know, those films, the first one I saw was The Aviator's Wife. It was the first summer I was just starting to watch movies, 1981. I was like, I didn't really like it much. I'd never seen a film like it. I didn't really know where to put it, you know. But then every year there would be this new Eric Romer film, practically, and I just got so used to them, and they just kind of built, and the charm, the profundity, like I was saying, and Boyfriends and Girlfriends, or I think the French title, Holly, is it My Girlfriend's Boyfriend? Is that the?
Yeah, the friend of my friend, but it's gender, so yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah, the English title is Boyfriends and Girlfriends, which is perfectly appropriate. It's two couples. Well, I don't know if they're even couples. Oh well, you'll see. It's, like I said, it's breezy. But yeah, like I said, this is my favorite section. It's like Pauline at the Beach, Midnight in Paris. I mean, no, what was it called? Full Moon in Paris. Just this one. Last year, we showed Summer, which is the second to last film in the series. So this is very unlike Jewels in the Wasteland. I tried not to even show in a section kind of not even 2 films by the same director. There's so many choices when you look at the decade. There's so many great films and filmmakers. But for some reason, I think, for what I described earlier, I just kind of wanted to see this, this one. Like I said, it's beautiful, and what else to say about these characters? They're, like I said, all that, you would see them as shallow. They're yuppies. They live in, you can see the Eiffel Tower in the distance. They're in the suburbs. It's a planned community. It's like shops, and it's like they live practically in a French mall. It's so superficial. It's so clean. It's so like, it's the opposite. And, all of us who kind of came through the punk rock age, we hated, that kind of yuppie aspiration, materialistic. But this transcends that completely. He, at this point, Romero's in his late 60s, I guess. He made his last film in his late 80s. He made his last film. He was blessed with this long career. He started late. His first films, like I was saying, he was in his late 40s. But he was blessed with a really long life and made his last film in like 2007. He passed away in 2010 at age almost 90. So he I don't know, he just, a really incredible career, a lot of films, and very pared down. He started off making, I guess he had bigger crews and stuff on some of his earlier films, but by the time he's making these, and this for film people, it's really extraordinary how minimal, he was sort of the master of everything. He did this film with a crew of maybe 3 or 4 people. You kind of, there's a, how? He had gotten ready, didn't need a script supervisor, but he did everything. There's a wonderful book on cinematography by Nestor Almendros, the great cinematographer, who did quite a few films with him in the 70s, and I think maybe into the 80s a little bit. But he talked about, he just planned everything meticulously. If they need the flowers to bloom on a certain time, they would shoot chronologically, and what do you know, the flowers would bloom right at the time they needed them for the, everything was perfect. He's kind of this, I described him last week as kind of, there's a mathematical quality, but it's probably more geometrical. And you'll see by the end of the movie, they seem light, like you're just hanging out with these young people with their concerns, that most people would trivialize. It's like who they're dating, where they're gonna go on vacation, career things, but they're young, and, I think one of the main young ladies is a student, but she's getting out soon, but yeah, you would see that as it'd be easy to trivialize and make fun of, satire maybe. But he doesn't do that at all. It's just not his inclination. You are in there. This is the most genius kind of slice of life. He pulls you into their lives, and I find I really end up caring about them. They're not film characters in the traditional sense at all. They're just like real people. So he had a tone that very few people could ever pull off, and it's very charming, and it's not like laugh out loud funny, but it's the wit and it's a little smile, like, that's how I put it. So I don't want to tell you how it feels, but anyway, I hope you enjoy this movie. I hope we make it through the print, and Holly and I will be up here at the end. So let's go back to 1980, is this 8 or 7? Yeah, and the ugly Reagan 80s, and then there's this year's Eric Romero film. It's a vacation. Let's vacation to France and have a good time. So okay. I was so wrong in the not laugh out loud funny. I think the last time I saw it was not with very many people, and I was kind of thought it was funny, but I thought maybe others. It's laugh out loud funny.
It's pretty fun to watch with an audience in a big crowd and hearing where everybody picked up on the last.
So subtle. You always remember the color coordination of the very last scene. That's so brilliant.
It's funny, but it's also just really beautiful.
Yeah, he has such a spare, beautiful, simple, like that. He's just such a master. You're in the hands of a master here. There's nothing accidental. It's all like perfect. He doesn't, there's no close-up. Look at what this film isn't. There's no close-ups. There's no music. Not a note. There's hardly any night. That one scene, am I right? when he drops her off. That's the only night scene in the whole thing.
The one where they're walking. When he drops.
Yeah, he drops her and
off
she
in front
says,
of her.
yeah.
I mean, you talk about classical filmmaking style,
Yeah.
and when you don't, move the camera a lot or
Yeah,
draw
just subtle
attention.
little zooms, just little push-ins. I was saying before, he pared his style down. He was real minimalist. Bresson did this too, in a way. People start big. I like people who start big and go, I guess that's more European, more French. Americans start small and get really big. Just less and less crew. More precise. His style was so, a crew of, I think, 3 or 4 people, camera and sound, that's it. He did everything else. They'd shoot in order, very chronological. He would shoot, when they're shooting, it's very much weather contingent. He would shoot at the time of the day the scene takes place. So there's kind of no faking it. Something kind of, I don't know, it sounds so specific, so kind of perfect. But.
And didn't Nestor Almanza say at one point that he thought that he had a deal with the devil because the
it
weather
always
would
worked.
do
Yeah,
whatever he wanted it
Yeah,
to
he
do?
was in touch with the film gods. Yeah, he needed it to be overcast that day. They'd show up, it'd be overcast. They needed the sun to come out in the afternoon, it would. Just the weather, he had a deal with the weather. It just all, he said it was weather contingent, but yeah, he was masterminding that.
You were talking in the beginning about the geometry of the film, but also for Romero, environment is so decisive in a certain way, and I wondered if this brought up anything for you thinking about the way that he puts characters in place.
Well, the place he puts them in this, I said that before, just what a yuppie villa, this planned community. It's so you could make that look really ugly in a way, but I don't know. For some reason, you can feel his non-judgment, I think. Am I wrong? This film isn't a critique of that. It's sort of acceptance, embracing. I think he loves life so much in these characters and their lives that he just doesn't, he was a little more conservative than the rest of the New Wave. They were all going through their Mao phase, and he never really did that. He was very Catholic. He was.
Yeah, and philosophical, interested in
Yeah.
intention, and what people say versus what they think versus what they do.
Yeah, 3 very different things.
So
what a mysterious guy too. If you really get into his life, that wasn't his name, and people don't even know. He gave different names, different dates of his birth. His mother. He never told his family he even made movies. His mother died not knowing he was the famous filmmaker, Eric Romer. He wasn't photographed much later in life, but there's not a lot of young photos of him. Very private guy. Yeah, just kind of weird. Because mother never, he was embarrassed, I think. He started off, was he teaching or something much more higher class than
Yeah,
the arts?
teaching, writing, and writing. And it's funny because I think we had somebody here at the last Romero movie who had actually been a student of his.
Really?
You were a student of his. What was it like being
What
a
class?
student?
What
It was
subject?
just a fun class. It was just a general survey
What school?
at the Sorbonne.
Oh wow. What year?
I didn't realize at the time that I was with him just before he died.
Okay.
I didn't realize that.
So he was doing that, just giving back, had a few classes there.
Yeah, but he was
People
kind
do
of
that.
I was saying, it's like he was in his own world. You were just lucky to be in his sphere, kind of thing. He was just kind of rattling off about his, and it was cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it was amazing. Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know,
Wow,
did everybody in the back
fascinating.
hear her comment? So yeah, she was a student of his at the Sorbonne, and it was amazing to be in his presence and just hear him talk about anything that he wanted to talk about.
Here's a weird question. Did everyone know, who he was or to that
Yeah.
degree?
Yeah.
Because I've been around, Mike Lee teaches at the London, he's the dean of the London Film School. And I was hanging out with some of the students and I was there, and I don't think they really, unlike, I guess he's younger than Romero, but I don't think they knew who he is. I mean, they know he makes films, but they don't revere him in that way. I was kind of like, do you guys know who's your teacher? It's like, who's your dean of your school, you lucky bastards? But no, he's just, oh, yeah, my,
Have you read any of Romero's writing?
not really like his stories and stuff. I've read some of his film writing, but
Yeah.
not his. Have you?
A little bit of the Six Moral Tales actually he wrote,
Right.
but intending to make a film and knowing that films would be different. But the writing is very spare and beautiful, and it's
As
sort
a
of
critic, he was like that too.
Yeah.
He more, he wasn't so personally invested the way Truffaut and Godard. They really poured themselves into it. He had a kind of beautiful distance or something. I don't know. How would you classify it?
well, you get inside the head of the character, but at least so much space to be explored, and that's I think where the films, give the space he's leaving in the writing was how I interpret it. But it's that space inside the heads of the character that you're sort of you're following, and this is to me so interesting. And then seeing the way that their speech becomes action in a film by Romero, because you have so much plot, but it's all contained within the conversations of the characters.
Yeah, and it's really about desire, and then how things don't work out. They make a move. It's always a little wrong. There's always regret. It's just kind of about overthinking things, and that's this is sort of the flip side of Moral Tales. Isn't that always a guy who's usually about to get married and then he's kind of tempted? This is sort of the opposite. It's young woman, they start off though, it kind of works the other way, but it's that same kind of, I guess, perpetually asking, are we happy? Am I, when we first meet Fabian and Leah, I mean, they're already complaining about each other. They seem perfect together. Everybody's so damn beautiful. But, you can see the little discontent there right from the beginning.
And it's funny in these because I think more so than in the Moral Tales, where they're just like, we're sort of getting the woman or having the
like
affair is the thing. And in this, it's more like, what is my life going to be? And how are these decisions, creating my happiness?
Yeah, and it kind of, it's really spread out too. You feel like you really get to know everyone. I mean, it's her story primarily, but he gives everyone a lot of time. So that's beautiful.
So when you watch these films, and you said when you saw The Aviator's Wife that you were like, what is this? And when did you start to love Romero? At what point?
I think probably the next one or two. Perfect Marriage, or certainly by Pauline at the Beach, I was getting it. But by the end, like I said, The Green Ray, Summer, and this one were the ones that kind of put me over the, somewhere in there he became one of my favorite. It's like, wow, it's so special, you read about his life, and I don't know, just that style. It's totally his own,
You've made your own walking and talking movies.
Yeah, but I've been asked about that, and I said, I don't think he'd do a film. I find his complex, like there's a complexity, like I said, geometry. I said, no, I don't think I'd ever do a film as simple as some of the ones I've done. He has much more of a, he does let people play it out, but not for I don't know, they build differently, they're structured.
But at the same time, their worlds change when they meet each other, similar to in your films. And I think maybe that's what people see is their worlds open up, and there's even lines in this film where they say, I see it totally differently now. It's sort of like that when you're with the other person, it changes.
It's the subconscious, or what's going on in your head, completely verbalized at all times, which is, film can do that. It's not what they teach you, it's like film 101 is, don't talk about things, show things, and he's one of the best examples of that. Talk can be really special, really intriguing in itself, what it reveals, what it communicates, so he's really the master of that. I remember when I was just starting with Ethan Hawke on Before Sunrise, way back when, I found a review. I was just looking through, it had an Old Life magazine from 1968 or 9, and it had a review of My Night at Moz. And I read it, and I remember sending it to Ethan, saying, it was like, there's nothing more cinematic than two people talking, two people meeting or something like that. I said, that's what we're trying to do. So, like that could be cinema.
Does anybody have anything about the movie they want to talk about?
Yeah, let's
Yeah, right here in the center.
Well, so you're talking so much about how much the dialogue can like reveal so much and so excessive. Well, I feel like with his movies, it happens because it comes off as like a shy director, so you're getting a lot of the internal dialogue of a person being vocalized, and so sometimes it's a bit off-putting and strange because you're like, that's not something someone would articulate ever, but it's but it comes off as charming because there's kind of like a sweetness and like the shyness and kind of I feel like anxiety. I also find it funny in all his movies. He always makes some comment about anxiety at dusk, that, which just makes me think there's like this sweet tone of like shyness and anxiety and like internal dialogue.
Yeah, so shyness and anxiety of the films, and coming from his point of view.
And it's really well written. It seems kind of loose, but it's not. It's very specific. You know, people don't really talk like that.
No, it's
That precise, yeah.
Right.
These perfect
And then the way
conversations
they
where
move around each other.
they fit together. It's too perfect. But you accept it as reality. It looks so. I think that spare style helps you toward the reality of it. But you know, he would spend forever rehearsing. They were massive rehearsing, such natural performances. You know, it's beautiful. I mean, they're all great. You know, I mean, it's hard to tell sometimes if you don't reading subtitles. You maybe don't get the full nuance of the performance. But from my perspective, just they seem so like there's just not a false note. They're so relaxed into their characters. Maybe that helps when you have kind of it's so intimate the way they're making the movie. But he would apparently. Some of his movies are more scripted than others. The one right before this summer apparently was much more improvised. He would actually let them. It was so focused on her that he would there would be situations and he would let scenes play out. Where this, I think, is much more scripted and specific. But he would start by interviewing. I mean, months in advance, he would cast someone, and then he would meet with them every day and just ask, get their taste and, work a lot of that into the movie. Just kind of customizing that part to that person. So that's kind of great.
I saw Bren right here, and then we'll come down here. Yes.
So I think what he's able to capture really well that I don't really see very often is just like natural, like flirtatious encounters, which is I feel like for some reason really hard to film. And maybe that's the connection that people see in the Before trilogy, for instance, is that it has this really like natural, like flirtatious quality that's just I feel like I don't know if it's the directing or the actors, but it's just really hard to convey in cinema. And I was wondering why you think Romero's able to do it in his films so well and so consistently.
It's actually hard to capture. What if the actors don't like each other that much? Can they really be that charming for the whole movie? Can they be that charming doing the scene multiple times? But I think one of the most brilliant scenes is when Alexander and Leah are sitting there and he's like, well, come move in with me. He's just flirting with her,
Yeah,
It's so forward, but it's so flirtatious and charming and
well, so that character. It's like
yeah, it's
exactly
so,
what you
both
would
of
do,
their
right?
characters.
Yeah,
She's she's loving every second of it, but holding back technically. It's I don't know. It's just kind of brilliant, but they're so attracted to one another. I don't know how do you fake that?
I just feel like in his films, like so many different actors go through his films, and yet he's still able to like conjure this like
Over and over,
yeah, over and over.
I think it's that rehearsal and the way he's constructed the project around them. I think he just knows they can, what they can do. On the one hand, he's not asking for. I mean, she has to cry and things like that, but it's not overly dramatic. But this is very hard to do, just to be real. And, so it's kind of brilliant. He didn't always work with the same people. Like Sophie Renoir, she's in Le Beau Mirage.
Yeah.
Like,
But not a big role.
yeah, small part. But and other actors he works with a few times, but often it's just new people, new young people.
Marie Riviere was one of the more
Right, she showed up.
consistent.
Yeah, he must have
Yeah.
really.
And they had kind of an improv. She was more comfortable
Yeah, I think
working in
he
improvisation.
worked the film around her. I'm talking about Summer,
Yeah.
because that's what she was good at. her ability there probably made him comfortable to shoot that way. That film, I think, was even shot on 16 millimeter, even more minimal. I had a distributor I've worked with who did, Tom and Michael at Sony Pictures Classic. Back in the 80s, they were Orion Classics, and they distributed almost every Romero film. And you would hear them complain. They're like, he's so cheap, he doesn't have a set photographer, so they don't have stills. You need stills to publicize the movie. He's so cheap, he won't have no stills. You have to do frame enlargements. They would just complain. And then one time, I think this was somewhere in the 90s, like, it's a Romero film with the bad review, Like, these films live or die with that New York Times review. And finally, after 10 films in a row, they gave one a bad review, and they were just like, oh no, what do we do?
In the back here.
You mentioned the coordination. I just really love the clothes all throughout this film.
And there's no costume designer. That's all him. Yeah.
He do that all.
Yeah, he did everything. I don't know if he's going into their own wardrobe and saying, bring this, or if he's, I'm not sure. But yeah, there's not a wardrobe department. But yeah, they're just perfect. Yeah.
Well, with this movie and with Pauline Olafage, a lot of his summer movies, he has that primary color palette.
Yeah.
And it's kind of apologetic, like that last scene.
Yeah.
It's just like, yes, don't care. Primary color is summertime.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like, that's pretty common with European directors? You don't see it that much with American directors. It looks so beautiful. I mean, a lot of Romero's movies are so gorgeous because of that, those lush greens
Yeah.
of the outdoors, and then there'll be like pink sometimes, like some of them have pink shoes, lots of reds and blues. Why don't more people do that?
Yeah. Yeah, you're very much in nature. I love his nature, when they're walking through yeah.
So,
And then
but
contrasting that with like,
why not, like, why don't more people, why don't more directors do the color palette approach?
yeah, I don't think it's any one thing. It's what story you're telling, what the characters would be wearing. A lot of times films, there's a color palette for the whole film, and that's the production design, that's wardrobe, that's everything. And you might, depending on the story you're telling, that could shift over a movie, just depending on what you're trying to say. So, I don't know, I think he's taken his cues from life, he's not really, must be something just, he likes the way that color looks in that location. It might be as simple as that, but probably not.
There's definitely some
I doubt it.
paintings that are evoked by this, or even by what the words that they're saying, like when they're talking about people hanging out on the beach and reminding them of being in the 19th century, like, oh, sort of like.
They do seem like, the obvious thing would be these impressionist paintings of, people in parks and on the beach, and, those landscapes. And, well, Sophie is Renoir's great-granddaughter.
Père et fils, because she's the niece of Jean Renoir, and then
Right.
and great-granddaughter of
Her dad's Claude Renoir, the cameraman. All those are Renoirs.
The royalty, yes.
Yes.
So, being a fan of Romero and yourself, Mr. Linklater, I noticed there's this heavy sense of these deeper thoughts and meanings in his dialogue, more philosophical, lost love or memories. I just was wondering if that inspired you in your own writing, watching Romero films, or even almost experiencing a Romero kind of conversation.
So the question was, did Romero inspire you, particularly in the way that he makes very philosophical films and very thoughtful films about important things like love and.
About me, but I remember, meeting someone in '89, the film that Before Sunrise is kind of based on. We spent a night walking around Philadelphia, but I was thinking, this is kind of like a Romero movie. we were just talking philosophical, very,
Did that kind of
very verbal,
maybe the framework for how you would present Jesse and Celine, that kind of tracking shot or that one-on-one?
It's hard to say, I don't know.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that way, but yeah, it's like, no, like I said, he's waves. It's great.
We take a couple more comments. I saw this one over here.
He was talking about the intimacy of his sets, and I'm just wondering comparatively, like, how intimate are your sets? Because they feel intimate on the screen.
Comparatively, how intimate are your sets, and particularly in the before films?
I shouldn't have shown
Yeah,
this, but
yeah.
it's invited
Four
too much self-screening. I'm talking about
Sorry.
other people's films. Intimate. Well, you know, I think it should be as intimate as everyone's, you know, personalities will allow. You know, some actors don't want to be that intimate. I prefer people who want to just go all in and, you know, give everything of themselves to what we're trying to do. You know, so this feels like a huge commitment, doesn't it? You can just tell those people lived this film for those months or however long. I think it was probably several months, like a big build-up, and then the shoot is probably. I mean, does anyone know, like, how many days, you know? It might be one of those things that it's such a low-budget overhead that today we're gonna shoot for 4 hours between, you know, 2 and 4 or something, you know, we'll get there early. It might be that, so loose, or I don't know if I get the feeling they're not working full days. So maybe it's a longer schedule because it just doesn't cost that much, you know? The American, or most film productions, it's so much time and money, you know, budget, do as much as possible, and it's really, that's kind of more of a manufacturing decision, which is sometimes at odds with quality, but there's just a practical side. So I feel it's an artist who's created his own canvas here, and he's gonna do it in chronological order, when he wants, the way he wants, when everything's perfect. You know, it just feels like there's just zero compromise, you know. I guess he's getting permissions, you know, he's shooting at Rolling Garros there in the, you know, that, I think that was Ivan Lendl. We saw one serve. I doubt he got, he was one of the big tennis players of the 80s. I think that we just saw his back. I doubt they got his permission and stuff. In the US, it would be lawyers saying, you can't use that, you gotta get a signed thing.
Well, what do you think of the fact that he had such a quick shot at that? That he chose such, it was almost like a setup for the scene for the character.
Yeah, it was so.
Question about such a quick shot.
It was
for
a
the
serve, it
volunteer.
wasn't a volley. You
Right,
know.
but then he has the extended sequence that's almost documentary in nature.
Outside.
In the park, where there's
Oh, yeah.
focus on, he almost slips out of the story for an extended.
Yeah, that's unusual that he's cutting around to all those different, it's just observational Sunday in the park, you know, kind of things.
I just noticed such a contrast between the two.
Yeah, where it's this intricate story going on, and then we just settle in and hang with those other, you just get the atmosphere, you really soak it in. So I think it's beautiful, you know. I think the film needs that at that point, to feel like, oh, we're in the park.
Breathes a
Because
little.
because it's so, you know, one gets up, the way it's cut, so elliptical, you know, like, and then boom, they're meeting again the next scene. It's really structured, really. It's highly structured, and it's got a momentum to it, though it doesn't feel that way, but it's kind of almost unrealistic that the way what they're cutting out is like their lives, you know, to such a big degree. You know.
You had your hand up for a while.
Well, okay, it seems like it's human nature that, you know, we like to assess and judge people in the first few minutes that we meet them. So with Romero here, we're meeting people, and I'm looking at Fabian, and I'm not liking this guy. He's self-centered, he's rude, he's unhappy, he's just, you know, I've got him all figured out. I don't think I'm gonna like him the rest of the movie.
Right.
But as time goes on, I realize that it's actually, you can't judge the person by themselves. It's in the combination of who they're with, because their personality is a reflection of that dynamic, and so the dynamic totally changes. And he swaps that around to someone who is caring, who is considerate, who is
It's a different guy. Yeah, when you first see him, he's kind of agitated because
Yeah.
he's not happy in that relationship, so he's not giving you. And same with Alexander's girlfriend initially.
Right.
She seems like a real girl, and then you know she ends up, you know, she's like a regular old gal. Once she got away from him, everything's okay. So yeah, you don't know. I mean, yeah, it's like you really do have to hang out with people too. We do judge people quickly, though, don't we? It's and movies do too. You know, that's another film 101. Like, I don't like this person for the first half of the movie. We gotta work on that. what can we do to make them more likable, or you want to get people early thinking people will be bored, or it, you know, it just lets you have that relationship, you know, like you would in life. So it's, you know, demands that kind of attention and that patience, but the payoff feels so real, you know.
We have time for a couple more hands. I know you.
I was just going to make a comment. I was at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago last week, and they're celebrating their 50th, and so they have all their collections out. And there was one, it was just a video, and you're just literally looking at this type, you know, the old typewriter, and it's typing, and it's a conversation, and then, then they splice in a few scenes just to give you some context of an environment. But then it was just dedicated to Eric Holman. It was very cool.
Interesting. I can't summarize that further.
No,
we already heard
I'm
that.
sorry. It's driving me
what
nuts.
museum
It's
were?
dedicated to
Museum
him.
of Contemporary Art in Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yes.
This is like kind of a weird comparison, but when I was watching that, I was reminded of this interview with Dario Argento when he was talking about his movie Tenebrae, and that's like a horror movie. But he said he wanted to convey that like the films. None of this is explained in the movie, but he said he wanted to convey that the film took place in like this scientific dystopia where like life had ended and all these rich yuppies were kind of secluded in this weird world, and like I felt like I was watching like the utopian version of that. Distorted reality, but like this lovely, beautiful.
I know, it's the flip side of that. I said that kind of in the intro. I was thinking about, it would be so easy to make this some kind of horror film, some kind of like, oh my God, that'd be a very American for sure, definitely in the horror genre, but it just doesn't. That's just kind of what's so beautiful about it.
Well, something interesting about the apartment building where she lives
Oh, that
is
view is so like it's
insane.
Just nothing.
It's like, yeah.
White, just.
Work in progress. But
It'll grow. She says like,
yeah.
oh, those will. It's also new, like when all that stuff grows in.
Yeah, but it looks like it's
They're
the
so
shape
forgiving.
of Versailles,
Oh,
and
right,
then so it's almost like this, and I think it's sort of like probably at the time sort of an ideal of like, you know, socialist France. Everybody has your bureaucratic middle class job, and you've got in the weekends you have your sport, and you know then you go back to work and you should be happy. This is like we created society to
Here's
function
your
this way.
Cubbyhole in your land community.
But I think that's like so interesting for him to choose, you know, something that's quite representative of, you know, the way that culture and society has been set up for, you know, people to have things fairly and for.
And they're also, I mean, you would just say conformist. They're so happy. You know, they don't even want to go into Paris, you know, one of the greatest cities in the world. They're just happy in their concrete, you know, planned community. So, what does that say though? I don't know, it's so charming. I don't know. But I mean, they're very vulnerable emotionally, and they're obviously all kind of, you know.
What's funny, yeah, like
Everyone's
Paris,
life is-
you have it's sort of the opposite of the young woman who is, you know, in the suburbs and it's like, I gotta get out of here. I gotta have my nightlife in Paris. And that is sort of represents the different, and it's almost more, her character is almost more irritating.
Oh yeah, she's pushing the boundaries of likability. The whole movie. You really have to bring a lot of empathy to her. So if you could watch one other Romero film right now, what would it be?
Well,
You had to pick one.
yeah.
Everybody's their one favorite.
Winter's Tale.
Winter's
Winter's
Tale.
Tale.
Collector.
Yeah,
Ray,
Summer Green Ray.
My Haunted Mods, so good. That's so
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Springtime in that. The
Springtime. Tale of
Springtime.
Tell us.
Mm-hmm.
One where the two friends meet in the country, one is a painter, and then they go into the city. I forgot what it's called.
The
The
collector first.
Collector. Well, no,
What's going on? Is it?
that's kind of like the Collector.
Hmm.
At the end, they shoot one of those regular. No, I know what you're
No.
talking about. She has really long dark hair, the painter. And the other
There's
one's
so
a
many.
kleptomaniac
That's the
who
thing.
steals meat.
There's so many Romero films. That's another good thing.
This is Ray.
Oh, Renette and Mirabelle?
Yeah, Renette.
Yes.
Renette
okay.
Miro, yeah.
Yeah. Good job.
Did you see what was his French Revolution? He did some, this style is the primary, but he did some period films that he really, and he was very early technological innovator, believe it or not, on The Lady and the Duke. Remember that one?
Where it's like a live painting.
Yeah.
It's like
He's using, it's all a green screen movie. It's a set, pre-French Revolution.
I kept looking at him like, is this a painting or is it?
So yeah, but he uses it to great effect. He obviously doesn't have the budget to recreate that time, but it works really. It's really interesting. And he's telling that story. He got a lot of crap for that too, because he was kind of on the. Well, again, kind of on the conservatives.
Yeah.
He was saying these people are great. It's like the ones who were soon to get that they were rebelling against. He was kind of, hanging out with them, thinking they're all.
It's funny, but
I
he's
don't know if
like,
he
well,
had, I don't know if he had like politics in the traditional, way.
he's really interested in what the things that drive people's like your love. It's like love. That's the thing. It always comes back to that. Like what desire, love.
Yeah,
What
it's
are the
very personal. It's
small
never,
decisions that make your life, make you, like when he says in this film, I picked the wrong line at the grocery store and I freaked out. It's like the moment to moment things that affect how we feel.
Yeah. And who doesn't ever have that? That's like constant.
So what's yours if we could show another if we did another one in the 80s, other than we did two, so it's like.
Yeah, we
What
covered the
else?
80s. I think we'd do another. I haven't seen his very last film. Did
I
it
saw it,
play?
yeah. It's so odd.
Yeah, it's very different. It's another, the guy's
It's like
87 or
I don't
whatever.
even know if you would call it a period piece. It's like a
Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah, it really.
Like
went
a
off.
Greek, is it Greek? Astray and Celadon. Or it's like a
Right.
French, or
Yeah, I
maybe
haven't
even a
even
French
seen that.
tale.
I just-
It's called The Romance of Astray and Celadon. And it's this sort of love triangle, but between like shepherdesses.
Mhm.
It's very odd.
Yeah. So,
It's sort of like, it's like almost like a reverie of like, oh, I just had this strange dream and I'm gonna make this
Mhm.
like fanciful.
did it feel like, I'm always saying in this series, John Huston, The Dead is a great last film. Did that feel for him like a good last film, or was it just a weird? Because it's not representative of the rest of the body of work to that degree.
Well, it feels like it feels less rigorous in a certain way. But it almost does feel like, I'm really old and this is so beautiful. Like this is, I just want to look at something that's very beautiful. And that's, that's all, that was my interpretation of that film.
Okay, well, he's earned that.
Has anybody else seen it?
I think, yeah.
You saw it. Did I accurately describe it?
Well, what's the next? Okay, so we don't
next
have one.
week is it Born on the 4th? Next week? Oh, Ishtar. It's Ishtar. Thank you.
Can we do it next Wednesday, or do we?
On Tuesday.
Tuesday. Thanks, guys.
Oh, it's
I
next
don't
Tuesday.
know. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yes. Tuesday is
before Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Okay. So Tuesday, Ishtar. That'd be fun. Come back to America. This was a low-budget French film. That's a huge Hollywood, big-budget comedy that travels the world. Notorious movie, but I can't wait to see it on the big screen again.
Yeah. Tell them why they should come back next week.
I think it falls into that category. I haven't seen it since it came out, but I don't know. It's one of those notorious films that the studio was sort of at war with the artist all through the 80s. That's one reason it made such a sucky decade. They were really, you could just feel it. And, Warren Beatty had gotten pretty big for his britches. And there was a new studio head that kind of took over the studio after the film was already made, which as a filmmaker, you never want to be in that position. So the people releasing the film aren't the people who greenlit the film. In fact, they've come in with an agenda to, get these artists in line, so they kind of sabotaged their own film. David Putnam was they kind of made it a bomb. But I remember it was an embattled film, the word was bad, this and that and the other. But that was kind of engineered by the studio itself. It was sort of self-sabotage. I don't think there was anything the artist could do, Elaine May, Hoffman, or Beatty. But I remember going to the theater, and there weren't many people there, but I was sitting there just laughing like, this is comedy at a really, it's we talked to some really talented folks, and Beatty is always good. He's never, everything he's done is pretty, if Beatty puts his mind to it, especially in this era, it's going to be worth your while. And I mean, he's a producer, but Elaine May is such a unique voice and talent. To see them all together. I never got her whole story, but on that particular film, I think she was kind of quiet. He was the more guy they were going after, but I think it did sink her directing career, to have a big failure like that. So unfair, but let's, so I'm wanting to, revive that, or, it will technically be a revisionist view because people don't look highly on that film, but it won't be for me because I do look highly on that film as I remember. So I'm just curious how it's holding up, See if I was just, anyway, but it was just funny. It's got a great cast. Charles Grodin, and it's wonderful. Isabella Gianni.
You'll love it. So
You
come
will
back
love it.
next week.
Come enjoy Ishtar.
Thanks for
Tuesday
coming
night,
to
people.
Boyfriends and Girlfriends.
So,
And
yeah, thanks. This was a lot of
great
fun.
to see you guys.
See you guys.
We'll see you next week for Ishtar.